Ellie Drummond stood alone on the dusty road outside Cottonwood Springs, watching the wagon train disappear westward. Her hand rested on her swollen belly as the wagon master's words echoed in her mind. A woman in your condition, without a husband, is more burden than we can bear. 5 months pregnant when Thomas succumbed to typhoid, she'd continued their journey west, clinging to the land claim papers that represented their dream. Now, at 7 months, she found herself abandoned, a liability to proper folk. "You'll kill yourself and that baby trying to reach that homestead," Sheriff Daniels said, approaching from behind. His weathered face showed genuine concern beneath official caution. "Winter comes early here." "I have nowhere else to go," Ellie replied, her Boston accent marking her as surely as her fine-boned hands, now calloused from months on the trail. "And no means to stay." The sheriff sighed. "At least take provisions. That homestead's 3 days west, following the creek." That afternoon, Ellie used the last of Thomas's savings to purchase a mule and cart. The shopkeeper's wife watched with disapproving fascination. A pregnant widow traveling alone was either desperate or immoral. Ellie had ceased caring which they believed. She departed at dawn, her possessions meager, but her resolve unyielding. The vast Nebraska prairie stretched around her, beautiful and indifferent. As she traveled, Ellie spoke to her unborn child about the home they would build, almost believing it herself. On the second day, the sky darkened prematurely. The air turned electric as thunderheads gathered with unnatural speed. The first fat drops struck as Ellie sought higher ground, but the cloudburst hit with sudden violence. Lightning cracked overhead, sending her mule into panicked flight, cart and possessions vanishing into the downpour. Alone in the deluge, Ellie spotted a cornfield and staggered toward it. The stalks closed around her, offering minimal shelter as the storm unleashed its fury. Then came the first contraction, sharp and definitive. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, not yet." But her body had its own imperatives. Through driving rain and mounting pain, Ellie fought to remember everything she'd observed, assisting the midwife back in Boston. Hours blurred as contractions intensified. She bit down on her sleeve to stifle screams that no one would hear anyway. When the baby finally slipped into her trembling hands, the storm was beginning to abate. A girl, tiny but perfect. Using her sewing scissors, Ellie cut the cord, then wrapped the infant in her sodden shawl. "Hope," she whispered, "the name a prayer as much as a christening. I'm so sorry, little one." As consciousness began to fade, Ellie curled around her newborn daughter. She had failed Thomas's dream, failed this innocent child, failed herself. The last thing she registered was the rustle of cornstalks parting nearby and the low whine of a dog. Then darkness claimed her. Jesse Blackwood never slept through storms. They brought back Sand Creek, the screams, the blood, Morning Star's body cradling their unborn child. Tonight, his dog scouts, frantic pawing at the door, pulled him from familiar nightmares. "What is it, boy?" The dog bolted toward the cornfield separating Jesse's land from the main road. Jesse followed, lantern raised against the fading storm. Scout led him to a clearing where cornstalks lay flattened. There lay a woman, deathly pale, curled protectively around a newborn, still slick with birth. The umbilical cord stretched between them, uncut. Both were silent, one from unconsciousness, the other from cold. Jesse knelt, checking for life, with gentle fingers against the woman's throat. A pulse flickered, weak but present. The infant, blue-lipped and motionless, seemed beyond saving until a tiny gasp proved otherwise. With practiced movements from a life he'd tried to forget, Jesse cut the cord with his hunting knife, then wrapped the baby inside his shirt, against his skin, for warmth. He lifted the mother carefully, mindful of bleeding, and carried them both toward his cabin. Inside, he laid the woman on his bed, built up the fire, and set water to boil. The infant, a girl, began mewling weakly as warmth returned, a sound that pierced the walls he'd built around memories of what should have been. Through the night, Jesse worked methodically. He cleaned the baby with a soft cloth, wrapped her in flannel, and fed her drops of goat's milk with a rag. For the mother, he used his Cherokee mother's knowledge, herbs to slow bleeding, willow bark tea spooned between parched lips, cool compresses for fever. By dawn, both still lived, though the woman remained unconscious. Jesse studied her face, young, Eastern by her features. Her hands bore calluses newer than her wedding ring. A widow, then, alone. The thought resonated unwelcomely. For 2 days, Jesse maintained his vigil. When the baby cried, he fed her. When the woman stirred feverishly, he bathed her brow. He spoke to neither, his voice unused to forming words after years of solitude. On the third morning, Jesse turned from stoking the fire to find blue-green eyes watching him. Fear flashed across her face, followed by confusion as she registered the baby nursing clumsily at her breast. "My baby," she whispered. "You saved her." Jesse nodded once, retreating to the far side of the cabin. "And me." Her voice strengthened. "You found us in the storm." Another nod. She studied his scarred face, the copper skin marking his heritage. Most white women would have recoiled. She didn't. "Why?" she finally asked. The question hung between them. Jesse had asked himself the same thing every hour since finding them. Why invite the world's complications back into his carefully emptied life? "Everyone deserves a chance to live," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite trust, but its precursor. Recognition, perhaps, of one wounded soul by another. "I'm Ellie," she offered. "She doesn't have a name yet." "Hope," Jesse suggested, surprising himself. "If that's acceptable." Ellie's eyes filled. "Hope," she repeated, testing it. "Yes." That night, Jesse slept on the floor beside the hearth, listening to the soft breathing of 2 lives now inexplicably entangled with his own. Sheriff Daniels arrived a week after the storm, tracking the recovered mule and cart. His hand rested instinctively on his holstered pistol when Jesse opened the door. "Blackwood," he acknowledged cautiously. Then, spotting Ellie by the hearth. "Mrs. Drummond? Good Lord, woman, we thought you'd perished." "Nearly did," Ellie replied, adjusting Hope at her breast without shame. "Mr. Blackwood found us during the storm." Daniels's gaze flicked between them, calculating improprieties. "Found you, did he?" "I gave birth alone in his cornfield, Sheriff. I was unconscious and bleeding. My daughter was still attached to me by the cord." Ellie's voice hardened. "He saved us both when others left us to die." The sheriff removed his hat, abashed. "Your homestead papers were in the cart. That land's 15 miles further west, unbroken ground. With winter coming and a newborn," he trailed off, implications clear. After Daniels departed, silence stretched between them. Jesse moved about the cabin, aware of Ellie's eyes following him. "I can't reach the homestead before winter," she finally said. Jesse nodded, continuing to slice potatoes for supper. "I have nowhere else." Another nod. "I'm not asking for charity. I can work, cooking, mending, whatever's needed." Ellie's chin lifted. "In exchange for shelter until spring." Jessie turned, studying her. The arrangement made practical sense. It would also bring complications he'd avoided for years. Town gossip, prejudice against them both. "You'd stay here? With me?" His tone made clear what others would think. "I'd rather face wagging tongues than freeze to death." A spark of defiance flashed in her eyes. "Unless you fear for your reputation, Mr. Blackwood." For the first time in years, Jessie felt the ghost of a smile. Couldn't fall much further. That evening, he retrieved her salvaged possessions from town, enduring hostile stares. At the general store, he overheard fragments about the new minister, Reverend Payne, recently arrived and already gathering influence, living in sin with that half-breed, woman of questionable virtue. Jessie purchased additional supplies, fabric for baby clothes, a second cup, extra flour. Small acknowledgments of changed circumstances. Returning, he found Ellie had reorganized his cabin, creating order from bachelor chaos. The simple domesticity struck him with unexpected force. "You've been busy," he observed. "Idle hands," she replied, taking the packages. Their fingers brushed briefly. Both pretended not to notice. 2 days later, Mercy Dupree arrived unannounced. The midwife examined Hope with skilled hands, her expression softening at the healthy infant. "You did well," she told Ellie, birthing alone. To Jessie, "And you, keeping them alive. Better than most men would manage." Her approval carried weight. As the black midwife who attended most births in the county, Mercy's judgment carried authority that transcended race. Before leaving, she pressed herbs into Ellie's hand. "For milk production," she explained. Then, with pointed significance, "I'll check again next week." As autumn deepened, they established cautious routines. Jessie worked the fields. Ellie maintained the cabin. Their conversations remained brief, but gradually warmed. Hope grew stronger, becoming the bridge between them. From his porch one evening, Jessie watched Ellie hanging laundry, baby secured to her chest. The tableau stirred something long dormant, not just desire, but more dangerous still, possibility. That night he dreamed not of Sand Creek's horrors, but of Ellie's hands moving efficiently through his home, of Hope's tiny fingers curled around his calloused thumb, of belonging. He woke trembling, not from remembered trauma, but from the recognition of how much he suddenly had to lose. Harvest brought structure to their tentative arrangement. Each morning Jessie rose before dawn. Each evening he returned to find dinner waiting. Between those bookends, they established a rhythm neither had anticipated. "You're holding the knife wrong," Jessie observed, as Ellie struggled with a corn husk. She looked up, surprised by his unexpected comment. "Show me?" His hesitation lasted only moments before he stepped behind her, adjusting her grip with careful hands. "Like this. Use the whole blade." Ellie nodded, acutely aware of his proximity, the smell of earth and sweat that had become oddly comforting. "Is that how your mother taught you?" The question might have shut him down weeks ago. Now he merely paused before answering. Yes, she was Cherokee, had different ways for everything. These fragments accumulated between them. His childhood with a Cherokee mother and Irish father, her stifling Boston upbringing, his time as an Army scout, her scandalous marriage to Thomas. One evening, she discovered him struggling with Thomas's salvaged book. "You can read," she observed. "Some." Pride stiffened his shoulders. "Enough." "I could help," she offered, "if you'd like." Their lessons began that night. Jessie proved a quick study, his intelligence obvious beneath his careful silence. In return, he taught Ellie practical skills, how to split kindling properly, which wild plants were edible, how to predict weather from cloud patterns. "You're a good teacher," she told him. "Had good teachers," he replied. Then, unexpectedly, "You're a quick learner. Most Easterners are too certain they already know everything." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered, and Ellie treasured it. Hope thrived under their shared care. Her first smile happened as Jesse sang softly in Cherokee while whittling a tiny wooden horse. The transformation of his scarred face in response made Ellie's breath catch. Mercy visited regularly, ostensibly to check on Hope. Her real purpose seemed to be assessing their arrangement. Whatever she saw apparently satisfied her. She began teaching Ellie about herbal medicines. "Girls should know how to heal," she stated. "Out here, it's life or death." The three women formed an unlikely bond, transcending race and circumstance. Meanwhile, Sheriff Daniels brought news from town, including growing concerns about their living situation. "Reverend Payne's got folks riled up," he warned Jesse. "Calls it a moral emergency." "What would he have her do?" Jesse asked, jaw tight. "Take an infant to break ground on uncleared land with winter coming?" "Didn't say it was reasonable," Daniels replied. "Said it was happening." The threat hung over them as autumn waned. Jesse worked longer hours, ensuring ample harvest before the first freeze. Ellie preserved vegetables and mended clothing with increasing skill. Their evenings lengthened. Jesse began crafting a proper cradle from oak, his hands working wood as Ellie read aloud from Thomas's books. The domestic peace felt both fragile and profound. The first snow came early, fat flakes drifting past the windows as Hope slept in her new cradle. The sudden confinement should have created tension, but instead brought unexpected intimacy. That night, Jesse impulsively taught Ellie a Cherokee lullaby. As they sang together over Hope's cradle, their hands brushed and lingered. Something shifted between them, acknowledgement of what had been growing since that stormy night. Neither pulled away. In the firelight, with snow falling outside, they stood at the threshold of something neither had dared imagine possible. Winter sealed them together, transforming their arrangement into something deeper. Confined by snow and cold, Jesse taught Ellie to play checkers with handmade pieces. She improved his reading, delighting in his quick mind. Hope became their shared joy, her growth marking time as days blurred together. In Cottonwood Springs, Reverend Thaddeus Payne paced his sparse quarters, composing another sermon on moral degradation. Though half-breed and fallen woman living in sin provided perfect fodder for his righteousness. His influence had grown tepid in town. He needed a crusade. "It's our Christian duty," he told the men gathered at the church, "to rescue that poor infant from savage influence and restore the mother to proper society." Sheriff Daniels attended reluctantly. That savage saved their lives when no one else would. "Evil often disguises itself as charity," Payne replied smoothly. "We leave tomorrow." At the cabin, Jesse and Ellie prepared for Christmas. Her idea, though he embraced it with unexpected enthusiasm. He'd carved a tiny wooden horse for Hope. Ellie had secretly sewn him a new shirt. The sound of approaching horses shattered their peace. Jesse tensed instantly, recognizing the threat before hoofbeats became visible. "Stay inside," he ordered, reaching for his rifle. "No." Ellie stood beside him. "We face this together." When Reverend Payne and 7 men arrived, Jesse stood on his porch, unarmed but imposing. Ellie beside him, Hope in her arms. "We've come for the woman and child," Payne announced. "This immoral arrangement cannot continue." "There's nothing immoral here," Ellie replied, before Jesse could speak. "Only survival. A woman living unchaperoned with a man, a savage no less, is the definition of fallen. This man," Ellie's voice strengthened, "saved us when God alone witnessed our need. He has shown more Christian charity than any sermon could preach." She fixed Payne with a steady gaze. "Judge not, lest you be judged." The biblical rebuke struck home. The men shifted uncomfortably. "The offer stands," Payne said stiffly. "Come with us now, or face the consequences." "She stays," Jesse said, his quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. "Her choice." The standoff ended uneasily, but the threat remained clear as the men departed. That night, after Hope slept, Ellie approached Jesse by the fire. "There's a solution." He looked up, questioning. "Marriage." She stated it plainly. A practical arrangement. It would silence them and protect Hope's reputation. Jesse's expression darkened. "You deserve better than a scarred half-breed with nothing but this land." "You've offered more than most," she countered. "Kindness without expectation, strength without dominance, protection without possession." Her voice softened. "Those are rare gifts, Jesse Blackwood." He turned away. "I'll escort you to your homestead at first thaw, help you establish there." The matter seemed settled until Hope developed a dangerous fever during a howling blizzard. Her tiny body burned while her breathing grew labored. Jesse recognized the symptoms from childhood illnesses in his tribe. Without hesitation, he saddled his horse and rode into the storm toward town, nearly dying of exposure to fetch mercy. When they returned, Ellie had been awake for 30 hours, refusing to leave Hope's side. For 3 days, they fought death together. When Hope's fever finally broke, Ellie found Jesse asleep against the wall, exhaustion having claimed him mid-vigil. "You would die for us," she whispered to his unconscious form, "but won't live with us?" That night, when he insisted she rest while he watched Hope, Ellie instead led him to the bed. No words were needed, as boundaries finally dissolved between them, their bodies expressing what neither could fully articulate, that they had already become a family in everything but name. Spring's first thaw brought beauty and tension. Despite their physical intimacy, neither Jesse nor Ellie spoke of the future. He began preparations to help her establish her homestead. She pretended not to notice. Both wanted permanence. Both feared asking for it. Hope, now crawling and babbling, became their only uncomplicated joy. She reached for Jesse as readily as for Ellie, her tiny hands finding his scarred face without hesitation. Each time, something in him softened visibly. "She has your eyes," he observed one morning, an admission that stirred Ellie's heart. What remained unspoken. "And I've come to love them both." Sheriff Daniels arrived as fields turned from white to brown mud. His expression suggested his news before he spoke. "The land office has no record of Thomas Drummond's claim," he said, without preamble. "The papers you had were apparently worthless. That land's been sold to settlers from Illinois." Ellie sat heavily, Hope clutching her skirts. The dream she'd clung to since Thomas's death evaporated. No homestead awaited, no independence, no plan. "I'm sorry," Daniels continued. "Reverend Payne heard already. He's offering assistance." Jesse's jaw tightened. They all understood what the minister's charity would cost. Public repentance, separation from Jesse, a lifetime of judgment. "I appreciate your bringing word," Ellie said formally, her mind racing. After Daniels left, silence stretched between them. Jessie moved methodically, preparing dinner, while Ellie sat, stunned, hope playing at her feet. "There are options," he finally said. "Mercy mentioned needing help with her midwifery." Ellie looked up. "You've discussed my future with Mercy?" "Wanted you to have choices?" His voice remained neutral. "Whatever you decide." The careful distance in his tone nearly broke her. After everything, he still believed she would leave. That evening she bathed Hope in the kitchen basin, watching Jessie through the window as he split wood with unnecessary force. His shoulders carried the tension he wouldn't express. By nightfall, Hope slept soundly while Ellie and Jessie moved around each other with awkward formality, as if they hadn't shared everything already. When they finally lay beside each other in darkness, Jessie broke first. "Stay," he whispered, voice rough. "Not because you need to, but because you want to. Stay with me, you and Hope." Ellie turned toward him, cupping his scarred face between her palms. "I've been home since I woke in your arms." The next morning, they rode together into Cottonwood Springs. At the church, before the reluctant minister and the sheriff as witness, they spoke their vows. Reverend Payne performed the ceremony with thinly veiled disgust. Sheriff Daniels beamed openly. Mercy stood witness, her presence a silent challenge to anyone who might object. Returning home, truly home now, Jessie led Ellie behind the cabin. There stood a small plot fenced with white-painted wood. Inside, freshly turned earth showed where he'd planted corn in neat rows. "This is where I found you," he told her, "where our story began." Ellie's eyes filled as she understood the depth of his gesture. This wasn't just commemoration, but transformation, turning a place of near death into one of deliberate life. "And where it continues," she replied, placing Hope in his arms. The child reached up, patting Jessie's face with complete trust. His eyes met Ellie's over Hope's head, containing everything neither had dared hope for: family, belonging, future. In that moment, standing beside the newly planted cornfield, under clearing skies, they weren't a half-Cherokee outcast and an abandoned widow, but simply what they had chosen to become: husband and wife, mother and father, a family forged not by blood or convention, but by choice. 20 years passed like seasons, distinct yet flowing one into another. The Blackwood farm prospered, expanding from Jessie's original homestead to include adjacent acres. The cabin grew too, adding rooms as 2 more children joined Hope: Samuel, with Jessie's copper skin and quiet watchfulness, and Catherine with Ellie's quick mind and Jessie's steady hands. Hope Blackwood stood at the edge of the cornfield where she'd been born, now 20 and preparing for tomorrow's wedding. The town's young school teacher, Michael Reed, had courted her with the same patient determination she'd inherited from both parents. Tomorrow, they would wed. Next month, they would break ground on their own home on the eastern section of Blackwood land. "Nervous?" Ellie asked, approaching from behind. At 45, her honey-blonde hair now threaded with silver, she carried herself with the earned confidence of a woman respected not just as Jessie Blackwood's wife, but as the region's most skilled midwife, alongside Mercy. "Not about marrying Michael," Hope replied. "Maybe about everything changing." Jessie joined them, his limp more pronounced after a day's work, but his shoulders still strong. The years had softened his scars and salted his dark hair with gray. The deep lines around his eyes came as much from laughter as hardship, a transformation few would have predicted. "Some changes are worth making," he said, his voice now familiar throughout the county rather than the rarity it once was. The journey hadn't been easy. Early years brought continued hostility from Reverend Payne, whose influence gradually waned as his rigid theology proved impractical for frontier life. Sheriff Daniels became Uncle Sheriff to the Blackwood children before retiring. Mercy, now approaching 90, had trained Ellie and later Hope in healing traditions that bridged cultures. "You taught me well," Hope said, linking arms with both parents. "That love worth having is worth risking everything for." Jessie nodded. "And sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our darkest moments." The family walked back toward the farmhouse, where lanterns glowed against approaching dusk. Inside waited their extended family, Samuel and Catherine, Mercy in her place of honor by the fire, neighbors who had gradually shifted from suspicious to accepting to proud of the unusual family in their midst. Ellie paused as Jessie stopped to adjust a fence post. After 2 decades, the simple sight of his hands at work still moved her. "Look at all we've built," she said softly. His eyes met hers, still holding the wonder of a man who had expected to live and die alone. Not bad for a scarred half-breed and an abandoned widow. "We were always more than what others named us," she replied. Later, after the celebratory dinner, where Hope and Michael received blessings and advice from their chosen family, Jessie and Ellie returned to the cornfield. Twilight painted the ripening stalks gold as crickets began their evening chorus. "Who would have thought," Ellie mused, leaning against his shoulder, "that being abandoned in a cornfield would lead to all this?" Jessie's arm tightened around her waist. "I knew the moment I found you that I was meant to stay." As darkness gathered, they stood where their story began, surrounded by the harvest of 20 years' labor. Not just corn and wheat and children, but something rarer still, a life deliberately chosen rather than merely accepted. In the rustling of the corn, stirred by the evening breeze, there seemed to echo the truth they had lived, that love, like the most resilient seed, can take root in the most barren soil, requiring only the courage to plant it and the patience to let it grow. Around them, the land stretched in all directions, no longer wilderness to be feared, but home to be cherished. And in their linked hands lay the most precious harvest of all, the simple, profound recognition that they had not just survived together, but flourished